The first reports came from the Outer Rim territories, where brave merchants and desperate pirates ventured into the lawless void between civilized star systems. Captain of the Hegemony Defense Force read the initial transmission with growing unease, his four eyes scanning the flickering holographic display in the dim light of his command center. "Unknown entity spotted in Sector 7 Alpha," the message crackled through subspace static. "Massive creature approximately 40 meters in length, moving at impossible speeds through asteroid fields. Ship designation unknown. Repeat, this is not a vessel, it's alive." His mandibles clicked nervously as he forwarded the report up the chain of command. In his 30 cycles of service protecting the galaxy's most dangerous frontier, he had seen many strange things. Crystalline beings that fed on stellar radiation, gaseous entities that could phase through solid matter, even the legendary void Krakens that haunted the deepest reaches of space. But this was different. More reports began flooding in over the following rotations. Trading vessels reported of the creature lurking near shipping lanes, its massive form drifting silently through the darkness. Its body seemed to shift and undulate like liquid metal, covered in what witnesses described as countless writhing appendages, and eyes that burned with the fire of dying stars. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session on Nexus Prime, the glittering capital world that served as the political heart of their vast civilization. Representatives from a dozen species gathered in the grand amphitheater, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic frequencies that the universal translators struggled to process. Ambassador Aura of the Crystalline Hegemony was the first to speak, her geometric form pulsing with nervous energy. "The creature has been spotted in 17 different systems over the past lunar cycle. Our have never anything matching its description." "Perhaps it's a new evolutionary branch of the Void Krakens," suggested General, his reptilian features creased with concern. "They've been known to grow to extraordinary sizes in the deep void." "Negative," interjected Dr. Aura, the Council's chief. Her tentacled head swayed as she accessed the data banks through her neural interface. "Void Krakens are silicon-based and follow predictable behavioral patterns. This entity demonstrates intelligence far beyond any previously encountered spaceborne life form." The debate continued for hours as holographic displays showed grainy sensor readings and artist reconstructions based on eyewitness accounts. The creature appeared to have no consistent form, shifting between configurations that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Sometimes it appeared as a massive serpent with countless coils, other times as a writhing mass of tentacles surrounding a central core that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. What truly terrified the assembled representatives, however, were the reports of the creature's behavior. Unlike the typically aggressive void Krakens or the territorial crystal swarms, this entity seemed to be observing them. Multiple witnesses reported feeling an overwhelming sense of being watched, of an alien intelligence studying their every move with predatory interest. "It's hunting," whispered Ambassador Aura, her crystalline form dimming with fear. "Every sighting follows the same pattern. It appears, observes for precisely 3.7 standard time units, then vanishes before our patrol ships can respond." The Council voted unanimously to classify the entity as a Class X threat and issued a galaxy-wide alert. All civilian vessels were ordered to avoid the affected sectors, while military patrols were tripled along major shipping routes. The creature was designated Subject Omega in official reports, though spacers quickly began calling it the Drifter, or simply the Beast. Captain found himself assigned to Task Force Vigilant, a joint military operation comprising the finest vessels and crews from across the galaxy. Their mission was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. Locate Subject Omega and determine whether it posed a threat to galactic civilization. The task force assembled at the Fortress of Winds, a massive military installation built into a hollowed-out asteroid at the edge of civilized space. 60 ships of various designs and configurations floated in perfect formation, their crews representing the best military minds the galaxy had to offer. Admiral, a veteran commander whose cybernetic implants gleamed against his blue-scaled hide, addressed the assembled captains via holographic link. "Our primary objective is reconnaissance and assessment. Under no circumstances are you to engage the entity unless it demonstrates hostile intent toward civilian populations." The briefing continued with detailed analysis of the creature's known capabilities. Sensor readings suggested it could manipulate gravitational fields, allowing it to move through space without any visible means of propulsion. Its size varied between, leading to theorize it could compress or expand its mass at will. Most disturbing were the psychic reports. 3 different telepathic species had detected unusual mental emanations in areas where the creature had been sighted. The psychic signature was described as vast and alien, like standing at the edge of an infinite ocean of consciousness. Ship, the stalwart guardian, was equipped with the most advanced sensor arrays the hegemony could provide. As they departed the fortress and began their patrol of the affected sectors, he found himself studying the creature's movement patterns on his tactical display. "It's not random," he murmured to his science officer, a multi-limbed being whose species was renowned for their analytical capabilities. "Look at these coordinates. It's following shipping routes but staying just outside patrol zones." "Perhaps it feeds on the energy signatures of our engines," suggested Lieutenant, her numerous appendages dancing across control interfaces as she cross-referenced the data. "Many deep space organisms are attracted to artificial energy sources." Their first encounter came during the 3rd rotation of their patrol. The stalwart guardian had been investigating reports of missing cargo drones in a debris field left behind by an ancient stellar collision when their sensors detected an anomalous gravitational distortion. "Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, reported the sensor operator, his voice tight with tension. "Distance approximately 50,000 kilometers and closing slowly." Felt his throat sacs constrict as the main viewer activated, showing them a view of empty space dotted with metallic debris. For a moment, nothing seemed unusual. Then the stars began to shift. What he had initially mistaken for a large piece of wreckage uncoiled itself with deliberate grace, revealing the massive form they had been hunting. Subject Omega was even larger than the reports had suggested, its body easily dwarfing their heavy cruiser. Bioluminescent patterns pulsed along its length in hypnotic waves, creating an almost beautiful display against the cosmic void. The creature's head, if it could be called that, turned toward their ship with unsettling intelligence. Clusters of what appeared to be sensory organs focused on the stalwart guardian and felt an involuntary shudder run through his nervous system. "Sir," whispered the communications officer, "I'm detecting structured electromagnetic emissions from the entity. It's trying to communicate." Before it could respond, their universal translator began processing the alien signals. The voice that emerged from the speakers was unlike anything they had ever heard, deep and resonant, with harmonic overtones that seemed to bypass their hearing and speak directly to their minds. "Small metal things that think," the voice said, each word carefully modulated as if the speaker was learning their language in real time. "Why do you flee when I approach? I mean no harm to the children of the light that burns." The bridge crew exchanged glances of amazement and terror. The creature could speak, could reason, and most importantly, seemed to consider them beneath its notice, not as threats, but as something to be protected. "This is Captain of the Galactic Hegemony," he broadcast back, his voice surprisingly steady despite his racing heartbeat. "We have come to establish peaceful contact." The creature's massive form shifted, bringing more of its sensory organs to bear on their ship. "You seek to know my purpose in your territory of stars. I am keeper of the deep paths, guardian of the small one who explores. We travel far from the warm place of origin, seeking knowledge of the great darkness between." "Small one?" Lieutenant whispered. "Sir, I'm detecting another signature, something much smaller, approximately 2 kilometers off the creature's primary mass." The sensor display resolved to show a tiny object nestled against what they had assumed was part of the creature's body. As their instruments focused on it, the truth became clear. It was a vessel, no larger than a personal shuttle, apparently attached to or carried by the massive entity. "By the eternal void," breathed. "The creature isn't alone, something is controlling it or traveling with it." As if responding to his words, the small vessel detached from the creature's body and began moving toward the stalwart guardian. The alien voice continued its strange communication. "The small one wishes to speak with voice as words rather than thought as meaning. Permission to approach your metal shell that protects." Realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. First contact with not one, but 2 previously unknown species, one of which seemed to be using the other as a form of transportation. His training told him to call for backup, to wait for the xenobiology teams and diplomatic corps. His instincts told him this moment was too important to delay. "Permission granted," he replied. "We welcome peaceful contact." The small vessel continued its approach, and for the first time in weeks, Captain allowed himself to hope that Subject Omega might not be the galaxy-ending threat they had feared. Whatever intelligence controlled that massive creature, it seemed willing to talk. What they would learn in the conversation to come would shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew about life in the universe, and challenge their understanding of the relationship between predator and protector among the stars. The small vessel docked with the stalwart Guardian with surprising gentleness, its hull making contact with their airlock mechanisms as if guided by an expert pilot. Captain and his security team waited in the main docking bay, their weapons powered but not drawn, while atmospheric processors worked to establish a compatible environment. When the airlock finally cycled open, what emerged was unlike anything in the galactic databases. The being was bipedal, roughly 2 meters in height, with pale skin stretched over what appeared to be an internal skeletal structure. Its head was proportionally large compared to most sentient species, crowned with fine strands of keratin-based material in a brown coloration. Most striking were its eyes, small by galactic standards, but possessing an intensity that seemed to pierce through those who met its gaze. The being wore a simple environmental suit that appeared to be of its own design, incorporating technologies that the hegemony's engineers couldn't immediately identify. "Greetings," the being said through its own translation device, which produced surprisingly clear approximations of their various languages. "I am Dr. Sarah and Deep Space Explorer, representing the species known as humanity." Found himself oddly fascinated by the creature's calm demeanor. Despite being surrounded by heavily armed aliens in an unknown vessel, the human showed no signs of fear or aggression. Instead, it seemed genuinely curious about its surroundings. "I am captain of the Galactic Hegemony Defense Force," he replied formally. "We have been tracking your companion through our territories. Our civilian populations have expressed concern about its presence." Doctor's facial features shifted in what their databases would later identify as a smile, a uniquely human expression of amusement or goodwill. "Ah, yes. I imagine Leviathan would be quite alarming to anyone who hasn't encountered his species before. He's what we call a void whale, though that's probably not scientifically accurate. We found him drifting near a dead system about 6 months ago, injured and alone." "Found him," Lieutenant interjected, her multiple eyes blinking in confusion. "You speak as if the entity is domesticated." "Not domesticated," Doctor corrected gently. "Befriended. Leviathan is incredibly intelligent, possibly more so than any of us, but he's also curious and social like most of his kind. When we helped repair his damaged bioelectric nodes, he decided to travel with us." The implications of her words were staggering. This human claimed to have not only approached the massive creature, but actually provided medical assistance to it. The idea that anyone would voluntarily get close enough to perform such procedures seemed beyond reckless. "You're saying this creature, Leviathan, chose to accompany you?" asked, struggling to process the concept. "Oh yes," Doctor nodded enthusiastically. "He's quite the conversationalist once you learn to interpret his bioelectric communication patterns. Would you like to meet him properly? I think he'd enjoy talking with representatives of your species." Before anyone could object, Doctor activated a small device attached to her suit. Complex patterns of light began pulsing from the transmitter, and moments later, the ship's hull resonated with a deep, harmonic response. "I've told him that you're friendly and curious about his people," she explained. "He's asking permission to establish a direct communication link with your vessel's computer systems. He's very polite about these things." The bridge crew looked to for guidance. Allowing an unknown entity to interface with their ship systems went against every protocol in the hegemony manual. But the human's casual confidence and obvious familiarity with the creature suggested this was a routine procedure. "Very limited access only," decided. "Communication protocols and universal translation systems only." Within moments, their speakers came alive with the creature's voice, but this time it was clearer and more nuanced than before. The translation systems, apparently enhanced by Leviathan's own understanding of their language patterns, produced speech that was almost conversational. Greetings, defenders of the small bright worlds. Leviathan's voice resonated through the ship. I apologize if my presence has caused distress among your people. The small human friend Sarah has explained that your species are not yet familiar with the deep void travelers. Doctor beamed with what appeared to be pride. Leviathan, these are members of the galactic hegemony. They protect many different worlds and species throughout this region of space. Ah, like the guardian pods of the Coral Star Gardens, Leviathan responded with obvious pleasure. You maintain harmony among the diverse children of light. This is a worthy calling. Found himself drawn into conversation despite his training. We are honored by your assessment, but I must ask, your species, these void whales, where do they originate? Or have no record of deep space organisms of your size and complexity. We are wanderers by nature, Leviathan explained, his voice carrying notes of ancient sadness. Born in the spaces between the galaxy's spiral arms, we travel the great currents of dark matter that flow between star systems. Our pods scattered long ago, seeking new feeding grounds and new knowledge. Feeding grounds? Lieutenant asked nervously. Doctor laughed, a sound that seemed to have a calming effect on the assembled aliens. They feed on cosmic radiation and stellar wind particles, completely harmless to biological life. In fact, they're beneficial. They help clear dangerous radiation from areas around inhabited systems. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Leviathan describing his species' nomadic culture and Doctor translating the more complex concepts for her audience. What emerged was a picture of an ancient, peaceful civilization that had existed in the deep void long before most current galactic species had achieved. But how did humanity make contact with his people? Asked eventually. Doctor's expression grew more serious. That's where things get complicated. My people, humans, were relatively new to interstellar travel. We only achieved faster-than-light capability about 50 years ago, but we've always been explorers, sometimes to our own detriment. She explained that humanity had originated from a single world on the outer edge of an unexplored spiral arm, far from the established galactic civilizations. Their natural curiosity and tendency toward risk-taking had led them to push deeper into unknown space than most species would consider safe. We encountered our first void whale about 20 years ago, Doctor continued. A research vessel found one that had been injured in a collision with a rogue asteroid. Instead of retreating, the crew decided to attempt a rescue. That seems extraordinarily dangerous, observed Lieutenant. It was, Doctor admitted. But that's how humans tend to approach things. We see something in trouble, and our first instinct is to help, regardless of the potential consequences. The rescue was successful, and word spread through both the void whale pods and human space that our species were compatible. Leviathan added his own perspective. The humans possess something rare among the thinking species of the bright places. They approach the unknown with curiosity rather than fear, and they offer aid without expectation of reward. Many of my podkin now travel with human friends. The revelation was staggering. Doctor was describing a species that had independently developed space travel, made contact with one of the most dangerous-appearing life forms in the galaxy, and formed some kind of symbiotic relationship with them. And they had done all of this without any contact with established galactic civilization. How many of your people are out there? Asked. Hard to say exactly, Doctor replied. We're not really centrally organized. Most human exploration is conducted by small groups or individuals following their own interests. I'd estimate several thousand ships scattered across this part of the galaxy, maybe more. Several thousand? Throat sacs inflated with shock. And they're all accompanied by creatures like Leviathan. Not all, but many. The void whales enjoy the company, and we've learned a tremendous amount about deep space navigation from them. They know currents and routes that cut travel time by months compared to conventional hyperdrive routes. As the conversation progressed, began to understand that humanity represented something unprecedented in galactic politics. They were a spacefaring species that had developed completely outside the established order, with their own technologies, their own allies, and their own approach to exploration that seemed to involve befriending rather than conquering or avoiding dangerous life forms. Your people, he said slowly, they've encountered other dangerous entities in the deep void. Oh, certainly, Doctor replied cheerfully. Space is full of wonderful and terrifying things. We've made contact with the crystal singers near the galactic core, beautiful but incredibly territorial. The phase runners in the outer rim, they exist partially outside normal spacetime, and the quantum gardeners who cultivate pocket universes in stellar nurseries. Each name she mentioned sent chills through the assembled hegemony officers. These were entities from the darkest military briefings, classified threats that patrol fleets had standing orders to avoid at all costs. "You've made peaceful contact with all of these?" Lieutenant whispered. "Mostly peaceful," Doctor admitted. "There were a few misunderstandings early on. Humans have a tendency to be overly enthusiastic about first contact situations. But generally, yes. Most deep void entities are more curious than hostile, especially if you approach them with respect." Leviathan's harmonic laughter filled the comm system. "The small human friend speaks truth. Your species send loud fast chips that smell of fear and weapons. Humans send small quiet chips that sing of curiosity and friendship. The difference in reception is significant." Realized he was witnessing a fundamental shift in his understanding of galactic politics. For centuries, the established civilizations had approached the unknown with military caution, treating anything they didn't understand as a potential threat. Humanity, apparently, had taken the opposite approach and found allies where others saw only monsters. "I need to report this to the Council," he said eventually. "They'll want to establish formal diplomatic contact with your people." Doctor nodded thoughtfully. "I think that could be arranged, though I should warn you, humans don't really do formal very well. We're more of a figure-it-out-as-we-go species." As if to emphasize her point, Leviathan suddenly announced, "Small human friend Sarah, the pod sister Blue Song approaches from the direction of the warm yellow star. She carries her own human friend and expresses curiosity about the metal shell defenders." Doctor checked her instruments and grinned. "Perfect timing. Captain, would you like to meet another human-void whale pair? Dr. Martinez specializes in quantum mechanics, and Blue Song is one of the most eloquent of the pod mothers." Looked around at his crew, seeing his own mixture of terror and fascination reflected in their expressions. They had come hunting a monster, and instead found evidence of an entire species that treated the galaxy's most feared creatures as friends and traveling companions. "Yes," he heard himself saying. "Yes, I think we would very much like to meet them." As they waited for the second pair to arrive, began composing his report to the Galactic Council in his mind. How do you explain to a civilization built on careful protocols and cautious exploration that there's a species out there that makes friends with cosmic horrors and treats the void like their personal playground? More importantly, how do you explain that they might have been doing exploration wrong this entire time? 3 months after first contact, the Nexus Prime conference chambers had been extensively modified to accommodate the most unusual diplomatic gathering in galactic history. The ceiling had been raised and reinforced to allow Leviathan and 3 other void whales to maintain a direct presence via bioelectric projection, while their human companions sat at specially designed tables that allowed them to interact with both the traditional galactic representatives and their massive partners. Captain, now promoted to Admiral for his role in establishing peaceful contact, watched the proceedings with continuing amazement. The formal diplomatic protocols that had governed galactic relations had been completely abandoned in favor of what Doctor cheerfully called organized chaos. "The thing about humans," Ambassador Aura had confided to him earlier, her crystalline form flickering with what he'd learned to recognize as amusement, "is that they seem to treat everything like an elaborate social gathering rather than a serious political negotiation." She wasn't wrong. Dr. Sarah was currently engaged in animated conversation with General about comparative military strategies, while simultaneously translating a complex philosophical debate between Leviathan and the Council's chief. Meanwhile, Dr. Martinez was demonstrating human quantum mechanics to fascinated hegemony scientists, while his partner Blue Song provided what she called practical applications from a nonlinear perspective. The third human captain was perhaps the most remarkable of all. A former military officer turned explorer, she had arrived with not one but 2 void whale companions, and what she casually referred to as a small pod of crystal singers who wanted to see what all the fuss was about. The crystal singers had nearly caused a diplomatic incident simply by existing in the same space as the other delegates. These beings were legendary for their territorial aggression and had been responsible for the loss of 17 exploration vessels over the past century. Yet here they were, humming in harmonic frequencies with the void whales, while their human friend explained their social structure to amazed. The key thing to understand, Captain was saying to a rapt audience of military commanders, is that most of these entities aren't actually hostile. They're protective. The Crystal Singers, for example, only attack ships that enter their territory without permission and ignore communication attempts. But they don't communicate in any recognizable pattern, protested General. Our analysts have been studying their emissions for decades without success. That's because you're trying to translate language, Dr. Martinez interjected from across the room. Crystal Singers don't use language as we understand it. They communicate through harmonic mathematical equations. Once you realize they're literally singing mathematical concepts about spatial relationships and resource allocation, the conversations become much easier. Admiral shook his head in wonder. In 3 months, humanity had accomplished more in terms of contact and understanding than the rest of galactic civilization had managed in centuries. And they'd done it not through superior technology or military might, but through what Doctor had described as aggressive friendliness and a willingness to look stupid while learning. The official purpose of today's gathering was to establish formal diplomatic relations between humanity and the Galactic Council, but it had quickly evolved into something much more significant. What was emerging was a complete restructuring of how galactic civilization approached the unknown. The question before us, announced Council Leader, his ancient form draped in the ceremonial robes of his office, is how to integrate these new perspectives into our existing exploration protocols. With respect, Council Leader, Doctor interrupted gently, I don't think integration is the right approach. What we're talking about here is a fundamental shift in philosophy. She stood and activated a holographic display showing the current map of galactic civilization, a relatively small cluster of interconnected systems surrounded by vast regions marked as unexplored or hazardous. For the past 1,000 years, galactic expansion has been based on a model of careful, methodical exploration. Establish contact with species similar to yourselves, avoid anything that seems dangerous, and gradually expand your sphere of influence. It's a conservative approach that's served you well. The display shifted to show humanity's exploration patterns, scattered points of light spread across regions that the galactic maps marked as uninhabitable or dangerous. Humans, on the other hand, tend to go where we're not supposed to go and make friends with things we probably shouldn't talk to. It's gotten us in trouble more times than I can count, but it's also introduced us to allies and perspectives that a cautious approach would never have discovered. Leviathan's voice resonated through the chamber's speakers. The bright space children have built beautiful gardens of knowledge and safety, but they fear the deep dark places where the ancient ones dwell. Humans swim in the deep currents and bring light to places that have known only cold silence. Bluesong added her own perspective. In the time before memory, there were others who swam the deep places with curiosity rather than fear. They learned much and brought harmony between the separated ones, but they chose distance from the bright space builders, and their knowledge was lost. Admiral felt a chill run through his nervous system. Others, there were previous species that formed alliances with deep void entities. Several, Captain confirmed. We've encountered archaeological evidence of at least 3 different civilizations that developed similar approaches to ours. The quantum gardeners still tell stories about the friendship makers who helped them establish their first pocket universes. What happened to them? Whispered Ambassador Aura. Dr. Martinez looked somber. Near as we can tell, they eventually transcended normal spacetime entirely. The gardeners describe it as choosing the deep dream over the bright wake. Whether that means they evolved beyond physical existence or simply moved to a different dimensional framework is unclear. The implications sent ripples of concern through the assembled delegates. Were humans following a path that led to abandoning physical reality entirely? It's a valid concern, Doctor acknowledged, apparently reading the room's emotional state with typical human perceptiveness. But I don't think it's inevitable. Those previous species seem to have been purely exploratory in nature. Humans maintain strong ties to our home systems and our own kind. We're explorers, but we're also builders and teachers. She gestured to her companions. Here still maintains contact with human military command. I regularly submit research reports to Earth's scientific institutions. We're not abandoning our civilization, we're expanding it. Council leader raised a manipulator appendage for attention. The question remains, how do we proceed? The evidence suggests that humanity's approach is more effective for establishing contact with unknown entities, but our existing protocols exist for good reasons. We cannot simply abandon caution in favor of what humans call aggressive friendliness. Maybe we don't have to choose, suggested Doctor. What if we established a joint program? Traditional galactic exploration for regions where your current methods are effective, and joint human galactic teams for contact with entities that have previously been classified as dangerous or unknowable. A hybrid approach, mused General. Conservative methods for standard exploration, human methods for extreme contact scenarios. With proper safeguards, added Admiral, and extensive training for non-human crew members who might not share humanity's apparent immunity to fear-based decision-making. The void whales found this comment particularly amusing, their harmonic laughter filling the chamber. Fear immunity is not accurate, corrected Leviathan. Humans experience fear as strongly as any thinking species, but they approach fear as information rather than prohibition. They ask, what can I learn, rather than how can I escape? Over the following hours, the framework for the new exploration protocols began to take shape. Joint missions would be established, pairing human explorer diplomats with traditional galactic survey teams. Special training programs would be developed to help non-human crew members understand human psychological approaches to unknown situations. Most importantly, a new classification system would be created to distinguish between genuinely dangerous entities and those that were simply misunderstood. There's one more thing, Captain said as the formal negotiations were concluding. Word of these meetings has spread through the human explorer community. You should know that there are at least 40 human entity partnerships heading toward galactic space right now. Some of the entities they're bringing might be challenging for you to accept. How challenging? Asked Admiral with growing trepidation. Well, there's Doctor, who's been studying with a group of beings that exist partially in subspace. Doctor has been learning from creatures that feed on dark matter. And Doctor has somehow managed to make friends with what we think might be a juvenile black hole. The silence that followed this statement was profound and lengthy. A black hole, Ambassador Ara finally managed to say. Technically a primordial black hole, Dr. Martinez clarified helpfully. Much smaller than stellar mass black holes and apparently capable of complex thought processes. Doctor calls it midnight and claims it's been teaching him about the fundamental nature of spacetime. Council leader, ancient features took on an expression that would have been recognizable as resigned exasperation on any human face. I see we will need to significantly expand our definition of diplomatic contact. Doctor's smile was radiant. Welcome to humanity's approach to exploration, Council leader. It's going to be a very interesting century. As the formal session concluded and delegates began mingling in smaller groups, Admiral found himself in conversation with Leviathan about the future of galactic civilization. Do you think we've made the right choice? He asked the massive entity. Opening ourselves to these partnerships, accepting human methods. Right and wrong are small-scale concepts, Leviathan replied thoughtfully. What you have chosen is growth over stagnation, wonder over safety, possibility over certainty. Whether these choices prove beneficial will depend not on their rightness, but on your wisdom in applying them. Looking around at the impossible gathering, humans chatting easily with void whales, crystal singers harmonizing with hegemony scientists, and diplomats seriously discussing the proper protocol for greeting sentient black holes, Admiral realized that the galaxy had fundamentally changed in the span of a few months. They had feared humanity would bring chaos to their ordered civilization. Instead, humans had brought something far more dangerous and far more valuable. Hope that the universe was stranger, more wonderful, and more welcoming than they had ever dared to imagine. 6 months later, when the first joint human galactic expedition returned from the deep void with detailed cultural exchange agreements from 3 previously unknown civilizations, and a comprehensive guide to safe navigation through what had once been considered impassable regions, would look back on this moment as the beginning of the galaxy's true golden age. But even now, watching a human woman explain quantum mechanics to a creature the size of a battleship, while something that might have been a living song provided mathematical harmonies in the background, He knew they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The galaxy would never be the same, and perhaps, thought as Doctor's laughter echoed through the chamber, that was exactly what they needed.